So then we are back with a modern understanding from the time of the Second Tabernacle. Services are refined in the Aramaic, English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. Then we find a layer of understanding in the 61st chapter where we find then the spring feast being completed, and then also the autumn feast, the mentioning of it, and then the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. Then, understandably, the first city of the Messiah then is going to be in the land of Cush, as per the instructions of the great prophet. And then, besides these, the economies of the world are then adjusting themselves for the new system coming. And then, not only this, but there was an article in the China news regarding then a bank, HSBC, making a deal obviously then with the Singaporean government of having then the RMB, it is the exchange of China yuan. So then obviously Singapore is the second most important port of the world. So you can imagine then, when the system comes, as we already evaluated the situation regarding then the virtual monetary system, then combining with the investments of the production of the Chinese, thus then the new system, direct trade with China, direct investment. And then if we don't start working in our taxation, lining up taxation and tracking from the freighters, then it's going to be a disaster. The situation is there are many of these layers taking place at the same time. At the moment we find then Daniel, the 12th chapter. We are after 09. This means the time of deceit or devilish time is gone. So remove devil from your vocabulary. Replaced with dragon. We are during the time of the dragon. Understandably, sometimes people are going to lie to you. But you don't go by lies, you go by adjusting yourself regarding precision. That's where we are at per the instructions. So let's understand then also another factor related with then high knowledge. High knowledge regarding computer. Then there is the virtual monetary system involved with it, where governments, they have no control over it. Then we find the Messiah speaking of the future regarding freighters of the earth, and the freighters were then in charge. When you understand freighting, you must understand labeling. Label, shipment label, tracking number. When people use a system where then governments, they can track it. The other situation is every time a shipment is generated, then they can charge taxes. It's kind of obvious. Now, our government is not doing the work. They are not doing what they should be doing. Visiting with the freighters of our country and having them land their tracking system, so then taxation can be included in a tracking system. It's the only way of tracking other than standard monetary system, speaking of a virtual monetary system. Any other way doing as far as then the virtual system, taxation speaking, the only way of gathering or deducting taxes is via tracking numbers. There is no other way of doing it. So then we find ourselves then with a couple of options. One of them is very bad option, is then use force. If we use force against the Asian system, then China joins up with the Soviet Union. So then it is truly stupidity. We don't want to have a conflict with China combining with the Soviet Union. As you understand, the 11th chapter of Daniel relates with the time of the restoration period, where then the base of the statue with iron and clay is further refined. There is the base of the statue started when the Roman Empire was then dismantled. Started the iron and clay time. During the time of the restoration period, these iron and clay is refined further, where you'll find then China, Soviet Union, and Africa making decisions. So then if we use force, then China joins up with the Soviet Union. China has the largest military in the world, far above ours. And then imagine joining up with the Soviet Union. That's where we understand then the 11th chapter, then the status of the Soviet Union, the later status higher than the first. Because at some point China and the Soviet Union, they will to join their militaries. And then we can't use force around the world. Not only this, expected in Cuba at some point being part of the system because they are socialists. Not only this, then DRC has the most coltan of the world. 80% of the resources of coltan is located in DRC. As you understand, then DRC was also involved with Cuba during the 60s. So we find then a very fine line from DRC, Cuba, and then the Northern Kingdom in China, where they control. Cuba, not truly because it's not part of the 11th chapter, but because they are part of the socialist system, then they become a posting of patrol of the Americas, where then we can't then block. So we can't use force. Force is out of the understanding. We must start tracking. It's the only option. Then we understand what the Messiah said in the future, and the freighters of the earth were then going to and fro in many places, because he saw from the authority standpoint those freighters were in charge. Then we find the second most important port of the planet being then the first regarding then the RMB, or the Chinese yuan. So the circle is closing. China is the first, Singapore is the second. And then when yuan then is used as the main means of exchange in Singapore, then the situation is closed. And then is by 2 years. So 36 months, you are talking about 36 months. The time is coming very fast. The taking over of the Singaporean economy via then the Chinese monetary system is very close. We are not only the 10th position in the 5th most important ports of the planet, plus 6. 4 points short of being the 20th. Our total per year is around 7.94. China is more than 30. This is only the port of Shanghai. If you then use the other ports of China, you can make a calculation. It is very big. We can't come against them anymore. The only way of doing this is by taxing via labeling. If you go to a store and you buy a product with cash, then the tax is on a ticket or on a receipt when you purchase the item. If the item is then sent to you and generates a shipment, then you are not charged on a receipt. You are charged on the label of the freighter, because then maintains a record of the freight, what is in the box, and the taxation at the same time. Because governments, they have no control over what items is being sent. In the new system, they won't be able to have any record of whatsoever. Virtual monetary system is not tracked. And the government can't go around and nosing around somebody else's computer systems. It's against the rights of the person. And there are no policies in place. And the time is very short. How are they going to track the system? What's in the box? And if there were only a couple of boxes, would be great. But then if you find more than 20 ships trying to track at the port, how are they going to take care with this volume? Not only this, how are they going then to discover what are on those boxes if they have no record? Taxation and labeling then permits the government of checking what freighter is using it, goes to the website, finds then the tracking number, find what is in the box, and is instantly deducted taxes. It's the only way of doing it. If we try to use force, then the Chinese is forced to make a deal with the Soviet Union. That's precisely what's coming, because the 11th chapter of Daniel must then be completed, where the kingdom of the north, the latest state, is then higher than the first. So then, rather than being then double damned, why don't we then work during this time and make sure we understand tracking, taxation and tracking at the same time? Otherwise, we are going then to try to use force, and then the militaries of China and the Soviet Union must join and protect those countries wanting to do direct trade with China, because then countries have no control. They don't know what people are investing. They can invest themselves, but they can't monitor somebody else's. There is no banking involved with it, other than the bank selected by China. However, when this Bank of China makes the system virtual, nobody can track it. And not having a way of then under the control, as we are after, we are desperately trying to find control over the situation, but we can't. What we used to have in the 40s and 50s, it is gone forever. We must understand what the Messiah has said regarding the freighters of the earth, and lined up with what he said. It's the only option. There is no other option. If we go against it, China furthers its way over then the Soviet Union and joins them. Then they become a force. Then you find Cuba. The reason why the socialism of Cuba is holding for so long, it's because they are then the patrol point of the Americas. Then you find DRC with the most important reserves of coltan, also socialist. So you have then the control of those coltan mines, mostly in the hands of the Soviets. You find the Soviets then lining up with the Chinese, and the Chinese with a patrol post in Cuba. We can expect Cuba then to develop very nicely. They obviously are coming out of poverty. So then pushes us back, and then our desire to control the world, because we can't do it anymore. We must humble ourselves before the decisions of the Creator, set more than 2,500 years ago. However, the Creator has given us a time to be the first, and we were, but no longer. And he must admit his sovereignty, and then lined up with the trade of the end.